Hello, you daring souls, and welcome to the Mixed Up Mystics podcast. This is a show that offers a remix of Christianity straight from the bedazzled buckle of the American Bible Belt. If you're listening to this, it's probably because a friend turned you on to it. This is kind of the speakeasy podcast. It's not for everyone. In this episode, we're talking about who is God's favorite. We're glad you're here. Sit back and join the conversation.
This podcast is a presentation of Pioneer Dream, celebrating 30 years of moving stories for our corporate, nonprofit, and entertainment partners. We invite you, fellow misfits, to join the conversation with text, emails, or just messages in the comment section below. As always, you can share this podcast with anyone you think would get it by sending the link now. Thanks for listening.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to The Great Experiment. This is, you really don't have to listen to this.
You do not have to.
This is our great experiment in which we try and have, conversations about spiritual things that don't suck. And to put
Spiritual things that don't suck.
Well, conversations that don't suck.
That would fit on a t-shirt. I like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we have absolutely no credentials or training in which to have this conversation outside of being, if we just round our age to 30, we'll just round it to 30.
I like it. We've lived a bit of life.
Yeah, we've lived a lot of life. We happen to live it right here in the great state of Oklahoma, which is, we would say, is the rhinestone encrusted belt buckle of the Bible Belt.
Right here where it's all happening.
Yeah, so we get to see a whole lot of religion and Christianity and all those things.
Spiritual flailing, I might call it.
Yeah, right. And so just to give you the quickest backtrack, in case this is your first time to join us, we had a conversation while we were driving, as we often do. We were without child, and so we had about a 3.5 hour drive. And somewhere in that drive, we ended up in what we would call the deep end of the pool. That's the place. If you were growing up, when you were hanging out with your friends, you would surf down to the deep end of the pool, and you would just hang on the side, and you would talk about stuff, and your legs would dangle, and you're thinking, "Is this safe?" And it feels a little unsafe, and yet it's where all the cool kids were hanging out, and you talked about deep stuff.
You did. Talked about deep stuff, and if you were me, you imagined that sharks were in the deep end.
As you might when you listen to this podcast.
Yeah.
In fact, so that's what we mean by the deep end of the pool. And so we got to this conversation and ended up going, as we would say, spiritual. And we realized in the midst of that conversation that stuff that you and I talk about a lot privately, as you'd say, sometimes after a cocktail or two.
Yes.
And but we've really always been reluctant to talk about that in a public setting because, let's just face it, there's a lot of squirreliness when it comes to the Christian culture.
Yeah.
And especially here in America.
And so many opinions.
And so it's a little bit like being a part of a family in which you're a little bit embarrassed of them and they're probably a little embarrassed of you, but you do share the same last name. So we don't talk about that stuff very much. And then in the midst of having this conversation a couple of weeks ago, you said, do you think anybody else is talking about stuff like this? Mm-hmm. And would it help if we had this conversation out loud for other people to hear?
Okay.
And then they would know other people are talking about this and it's okay to talk about this.
Yeah.
And maybe it would be another perspective or a different perspective than the one that is traditionally run in our Christian culture.
You mean the one that's being force-fed down everyone's throats?
That's the one.
Oh, okay.
So that's where we landed. And then, ironically, you had just released an album that talks about a lot of these kinds of themes, either directly or indirectly.
That's
I
true.
had just finished a book, which was also called, not so ironically, You Really Don't Have to Read This. And we thought this would be perfect because this is a conversation that no one has to listen to. But if you find this interesting or engaging or enraging, you might enjoy it. So that's where we landed on this stuff. And I'll just tell you again that this is incredibly uncomfortable for you and I to do this in a public format just because we have so distanced ourselves from that world in a public sense, but the reality is we do talk about this stuff, and if we're being honest and authentic, as we talked about in our last Dreamers Live podcast, then we kind of owe it to ourselves and to other people to kind of broach these subjects a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
What shall we talk about today?
Well, in our last episode, we talked about this idea of whether or not God was mad at us, or if he was, at the very least, I guess, displeased.
Or disappointed.
Or disappointed with us. And so, as with all these kind of conversations, there is kind of a macro and a micro version of this, or side of this. So, in the what we would call the evangelical church, where you're trying to bring more people in or win people over, that kind of thing.
Sure.
We trumpet this message a lot about God loves you, God's for you. And that's what we sing about with all of the hymns and the big worship music that we do. And that's the message we try to send out to other people.
Yeah.
And yet, at a near epidemic state, when you talk to people privately, so that's the macro version. On the micro version, of the personal version, all of us at some level struggle with this feeling that somehow God is disappointed in us, or he's displeased with us, or he's upset with us, or he's just waiting for us to, quote, get it. Whatever that thing is. That's the macro and the micro. So today, I thought it would be fun to talk about kind of the polar opposite of that. So if that is what we do in this micro-macro thing about our personal connection, our personal feelings, I think it's interesting when we go back to that and reverse that and look at it from a macro standpoint of the church at large. So at the church at large, we will sing songs like He's got the whole world in His hands.
That's an oldie but a goodie right there.
And the Bible loves me, this I know. And all those kind of things that talk about we are all God's children. And we do a lot of that. You covered the Christmas song.
I did.
On your Christmas album about... what was the title of that song?
Some People See Him, that one? Okay.
Yeah, and it's a really amazing song about the different... quote, faces of Jesus and all these different ethnic versions.
Right.
So it's very sweet. So, and then, especially in this evangelical part of the church, we send people out, quote, missionaries out into the world to try and encourage people to do that stuff. So that is the macro of that experience.
Okay.
But I think on a micro version of that, so when you shrink that back down to just like smaller communities or even us personally, what I've seen, and it's not black and white, it's not 100%, it's not all that kind of stuff, but what I've seen and what I've felt and what I've experienced is that we don't really weigh other cultures or other people as equal or level with ourselves.
Okay.
So, in other words, we kind of feel like, I think, as Americans, that we are God's favorites. That God might quite possibly love us more than He loves
It's like
the
instead
other
of when, for God so loved the world, it's sort of like, for God so loved America, because we know that we're the best country.
Yes, now that would be a good t-shirt.
Yeah,
for God so loved America. Yeah.
And and in fact, I mean, I don't know if you're asking me anything yet, but that is such a picture of the small view that we're taught growing up.
Right.
Not necessarily in our own personal homes, but the culture at large. It's basically, listen, we're not going to say anything, but we all kind of know that America is God's chosen country, and we're the great experiment, and He loves us a little bit more than people from the other religions.
Well, it seems like this is part of our national DNA.
Yeah.
At some level. So we came over from England. We did all the stuff. We got on the Mayflower. We came over from Europe, and on that process.
I like how you say we.
Yes. Well, I'm sharing responsibility.
Were you on the Mayflower?
I'm sharing responsibility.
That's totally fine.
So, but we come over to this promised land.
Right.
And we bring with us all the weight and privilege and prophetic nature of the Israelites coming into their promised land.
Oh, yeah.
So this
we
whole
go Old Testament with it.
Yeah,
sure.
So we had this little sense of manifest destiny.
Yeah.
We are God's chosen people.
It's obvious.
We're coming over here to start this new land.
Because the people here don't know how to do it.
Right. God shed His grace on thee.
Yeah.
And here we are. And that has been put in us and part of us from the very beginning.
Do you think that's the beginning of how all of that got intertwined in terms of
I think so.
political
we didn't
philosophy
invent that.
birth religion.
You can see that in England when you can see that in Spain with the Crusades. We did a lot of that forceful evangelism,
yes,
believe or die evangelism for a long time. So
that's a T-shirt.
No, but we did. But it was really ingrained in us, in the foundation of us as a nation. This is who we are, and the sense that we are set apart above all the other countries, or apart from all the other countries, to be this golden thing.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, history is as it is based on who taught it to you.
Right.
And we were always taught that it was for religious freedom that we wanted to leave England, to really be more true to God, to come over and work very hard and create this other culture. And there may have definitely been some elements to that. But it was also, I think, an element of people wanting to stick it to England. They were pretty much done. They didn't want to pay the taxes to the king anymore. They didn't want to be part of that.
It's an interesting thing, too, because
all of those things.
If you want to go down that road, if you want to say, okay, God created this kind of sort of divine opportunity, a chance, and he brought these people here, and he said, I don't know how you want to frame it, but if you want to do that whole thing, it's interesting that we tend to look at that stuff as self-blessing and self-grandizing, as opposed to here's our calling or our opportunity. We were made to
make the world a better place,
to do better, to lead by, and to do all that stuff.
Right.
And that's not what's really set in on us. That's not what we've taken out of it. So in our heart of hearts, we look at those other places, and we look, at the conflicts that are happening in the world, at what we see, and if we're being honest, and we say, okay, is a baby from China worth as much or as important as a child from America?
Right.
As a child in Iran? Is a child coming over the border from Mexico? Are any of those kids?
Did you just say that?
I just said that. Sorry. So is the baby that crosses the river on his mom's back, legally or illegally,
as important as our child?
Is my child.
Yeah. I know, that's some deep stuff. And I had I don't know if it was a shift in thinking, but you just have those moments where you remember your thinking change a little bit. When we had Evangeline, which was 12 years ago now, I remember there was a terrible story. I was listening to a little bit of NPR, and we try to vary the different things that we listen to get a broader picture, but it was just a story about a war, and it was a mother in another country who had lost a child, and the story about that, and I was just ripped up. I think it actually may have been in Iran. And I just remember crying in the car and howling, having this, it was such a sad story, but having this understanding, because now we loved this person more than anything in the world, that every other child has parents that love them that way, or that's how it was intended to be, and that we are the same. And I remember that being sort of a mind-blown kind of moment. I think because we're in America, we tend to think, well, we are kind of this chosen nation. So, and I also think that's a defense mechanism, because there's so many things that are horrible that go on in the world everywhere, that sometimes it's easier to think, well, they don't have the same belief system, so they're just not gonna they're not gonna have the chance that our daughter does to fare as well. And isn't that sad? But we're different.
But isn't that, that's our historic, that's always been our historic response. So, we show up on the shores here, there are Native Americans here, we need the land, we're doing some things. And so part of that is to say, well, these are savages. These are people that are not quite at the level we are. These are not full humans. If
you dehumanize them, that's what you and I talk about a lot.
The same thing with the slaves. We bring the slaves over. We can't really consciously get to a place that makes this okay to treat another human this way, to rip apart families, to divide them like livestock, to do all that stuff. And so in there, we have to say, this is not a full human.
And I mean, they don't know any better.
They don't.
They weren't taught the same things we were, so they don't know any better.
They don't have the same intelligence we do.
And so it's probably not hurting them the way that it would us. So we separate ourselves out.
So when we get to Mexico, we have this poverty index, and we have this desperation index, and we see people traipsing through the mud and through the river to get over to the other side, and that doesn't doesn't match our level of humanity. That doesn't match our level of intellect, I guess.
That if we were in the river, what that would feel like. That's we talk about.
So we don't put
empathy.
the same value on their life. We don't put the same value on them as we would our kid.
Yeah.
In that same way.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, I mean, that's probably what we do with the homeless. We see the homeless. It's too much.
Yeah.
For our hearts and minds
to process. That's it. You harden to it, and that's what I think it is. I mean, you do. There's so much going on all the time. We have so much information. There's so much news coming at us.
Right.
That I mean, I know for me at least, I cannot process it. It is just too much. And so I think it's easier in some ways to say, well, they're not really like us. There's not.
Yeah.
They don't have the same understanding. But
and then we, and this is not political. I'm not taking it politically, but we do shape this stuff, from a media standpoint and how we represent that. So these conversations about people in China, about people in Russia, about immigrants coming, especially from Mexico and South America. We start framing those people in a political context instead of a human context, instead of a humanitarian context.
Yeah.
And now, because it disagrees with our party line, that begins to shape how we see those people, those humans.
Yeah.
And so that is adding into this conflict. My challenge with it is that we come from a Christian tradition, and in that Christian tradition, we say and we believe that life is literally God-breathed. It's the breath of God that comes in and animates
creates life,
this human, makes this thing alive, makes this person alive. And you and I have talked a lot about this thing about feeling like there is a spiritual DNA in us that reacts and responds when you come in contact with stuff that's divine and amazing and alive, or something what we would call having mojo. All that kind of stuff. So when something has mojo, when a song is moving, as we used to say in the 80s and 90s, when something is anointed.
Such a weird word.
But when it has that spiritual life, there's something inside of you that responds. It gets quiet, or it celebrates, or
you feel it. It feels holy in a good sense of the word.
Time is suspended. Well, that's all part of this DNA that is in us, the spiritual DNA, and so we believe that's where life comes. That life originates from the Creator.
Yeah.
So my problem is that if that is the breath that makes me alive, that's the DNA that's in me, well, that's the same DNA that's making the baby in India alive.
Yeah.
That's the same breath that's making the baby in China alive, or in Iran, or in Iraq, or in Lebanon, or in Mexico.
Yeah.
That's that same breath. So aren't I obligated to treat that person with the same reverence or respect or love or holiness or whatever that I would be called to treat somebody here?
Yes.
So we have a lot of conversations about scriptures and about, quote, the brotherhood of Christianity, and about the family within our church. And we call a lot of our churches communities, which is brilliant and beautiful.
Yeah.
So many of those groups do so many good things. And yet we have that same responsibility for every person that's alive, regardless of where they come from in that process.
Yeah. We can't disregard others. I mean, it's wrong. And when you look at what Jesus did, he always tended to find the outcast and the disregarded and the short man up in the tree. Yeah. And he would go to the places where people were overlooked and were thought of as unlovely, and he would find them first.
Yes.
And that's one of my favorite things about looking at Jesus' life. And that's what we need to be doing. Yeah. I need to be better at that. Yeah,
if you look, and this is, I'm sure we'll lose people who are listening, the 2 people that are listening right now, but
we had 2, but it's down to 1.
It may be down to none. But if you look at the Gospels, like you're saying, and you look at the examples that Jesus gives and what happens in these 4 books with Jesus walking on the planet, and how many times, there's 2 or 3 accounts where Jesus singles out Samaritans.
Yeah. Okay.
who would essentially be the Palestinians.
Oh, whoa. You're getting deep right there.
There are people that came in, occupied Israel.
Yeah.
And then there was, a shit show that happened. And now they're living in contention against each other and they hate each other.
Yeah.
And yet this is the person that Jesus singles out as the example of how it is to treat somebody with divine love and respect.
Yeah.
This Samaritan.
Yeah.
When he goes through and there's this account where there's these lepers, which, it's we used to say the modern day AIDS. It was just a horrible, horrible disease.
Yeah.
And it was just so much so that people were shunned and they were put into
or COVID.
colonies.
COVID is an even more recent example.
But they would put these people away because they were so, fearful and all that kind of stuff. And so he runs in and it's 10 of these people. Mm-hmm. And he's just trying to get to the next tour stop. And so here he is, and they are shouting for him, begging for him to do something. Please do something. We are dying here. Please do something. Mm-hmm. And he says, okay. And he says, go show yourselves to the priest. And in the process of leaving and going to go show themselves to the priest, all 10 of them are healed, miraculously healed.
Yeah.
So all the skin is healed, the sores are gone, and you literally got a new lease on life. And only one of those 10 stops in his tracks and runs back to Jesus and says, thank you. You have saved my life. Thank you. And it's a Samaritan. It's a Palestinian.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's the
I'm not
one,
sure I ever
the foreigner.
realized that in the story, the foreigner.
It's the foreigner that steps up.
Yeah.
And then throughout the Gospels, it's Jesus who continues to elevate these people. It's him traveling with a pack of women who are the ones who are carrying on his ministry and paying for things and using their resources.
Completely disregarded in their culture.
Yeah.
Weren't able to go to school, teach in tabernacle, do anything.
It's the woman at the well that he chooses to, he turns this whole region on its ear and all that. And it all starts with him having a conversation with a woman. Yeah. That's also
been in five marriages and was a prostitute.
Right.
Yeah.
And she's also a Samaritan.
That's so funny. Yeah. I guess I didn't realize that. Oh, my Baptist tradition has failed me that we didn't mention it was a Samaritan. Yeah. No, but I don't think it's any accident that Jesus used that example or examples like that so many times. Yeah. He could have done something else, but it's always the outcast. It's the unexpected one, which I think, if you're looking at it and trying to model a better way to live, that you would take note of that. Yeah. All human life has the same value. And it's an overwhelming thought, just like anything. But I'd love to gear the way I lived more that way. Yeah. And I think that we're trying, as much as we can. We talk about this a lot. Like, I'd be fine to quit working.
Please. Don't let me twist your arm.
No, but I'm just saying.
I'll quit working. No,
there's a part of me that really has a need to be in service to people and at some level. That doesn't have to be all that I do, but there's a part of me that if I don't have I usually have some sort of outlet in my life for that, but if I don't have one, I start to get a little bit itchy. It doesn't make me great. Maybe it's guilt. I don't know. Maybe it's a combination of things. I do have that. Do you ever think that too? I can struggle with guilt. So I think our life is so good, I should be doing more to help other people. But Jesus spent his whole life serving other people and finding the unlovely and raising them up and bringing them up to the same level that everyone else was. So, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. This is an issue or a thing that's been a challenge for the quote church, from the very beginning.
You think like the church in America or in general?
Just like if you go back to the Holy Bible, and you finish the Gospels, and that's the story of Jesus while he's physically, here on the planet and everything. And then from that moment on in the Bible, it's kind of the establishment of what we know as Christianity. Okay. And so that's where the apostles, Jesus takes off and goes on a never-ending trip. See ya. And he says, "Now you guys go do this.
You do this stuff." And,
so they go out and they do this whole thing, and in the process of starting what we now know as Christianity in all these little house churches, and just literally going from city to city, saying, "Okay, well, here's what we saw." Yeah. For 3 years, I was in a traveling band with this guy Jesus, and this is what we saw, and this is what we know, and all of a sudden, it's just literally setting the world on fire in this process. And then this big conflict arises because that message and who they were talking to were the Jews. That's the heritage of Christianity. That's the beginning of Christianity. It's where it comes from. It's the origin story. The problem was all these Gentiles, as in non-Jews, kept showing up too. So the Greeks and Arabs and all these other people.
Else.
And they were digging it.
Yeah.
And they were saying,
like,
this sounds amazing. I love this guy.
The Jews are like,
now
no,
this true? And then the Jews were like, no, not you, us. This is for us.
Right.
And then the problem was God didn't see it that way. And so he kept doing these miraculous things, these amazing things. And he was pouring all that out and doing all that on the Gentiles, on the foreigners, on the outsiders.
Yeah, the outcasts.
And
that's always his favorite.
Yeah. And so it put all the apostles at a conflict going, what do we do?
Yeah.
It's not the people in the church that are being helped. It's all these people outside the church.
Outside of the church.
And we don't even know if they're donating.
Yeah.
I mean, what are we going to do now?
That's like, that's right. That's like when Jesus said, some of the Pharisees were, the religious people at the time were getting up in Jesus' business every day. Yeah. Or like Anne Lamott says, the boyfriend's all up in your business today, which cracks me up. Yeah. I woke up yesterday morning, I was like, the boyfriend's all up in my business. Yeah. I don't know, just when you're just a mess, Yeah. But he said, they said, why are you with these people that, aren't even part of our group? And Jesus said, well, it's the sick who need a doctor.
Right.
And I think he was just using that word to show them the point is, what's the point of preaching to the choir if we're only around people that believe exactly like we do, that go to church at the exact same time and all that, then what does it even matter?
Yeah.
Who are we? This is an interesting conversation, though, because you weren't raised, I don't think, were you raised as Catholic? Did you guys feel pressure to evangelize? And that's a fancy word for go out and make other people Catholic. Was that part of what you were taught?
No.
Yeah,
no,
it was kind of like you were born Catholic, right? Born Catholic.
We did that in foreign countries.
And there's a lot of amazing things that the Catholic Church has done to help people in foreign countries.
No, we were trying to get good for God. I mean, we were trying to toe the line and be better people and pray better and pray harder and
go to church more
and be there a lot and do that stuff.
Yeah.
But we were not expressly, trying to get other people to turn Catholic.
Yeah. It's
the best way to turn somebody Catholic was to find someone who was not Catholic, start dating them, marry them, and then convert them.
Which you tried, and I was
like, what happened to my grandfather.
Really? Yeah. So we were taught not to missionary date because that's dangerous. Because
that's exactly
what you believe
Catholics.
is more important than who you're going to marry, right? And so you can't missionary date because you might get pulled down to their level.
Well, absolutely.
It worked for me.
But we were Catholics. We were already down on that level.
It's an interesting. This is like another podcast for another time or another episode, but it's interesting to be raised or have ingrained in you the idea that your purpose in life is to bring other people to God, and that you are, in essence, with your behavior, persuasive words, etc., responsible for their eternal destination.
Right.
That is a lot of pressure when you're 10, and I took it on hard.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, those points and rewards, man. You were all about it.
And it was the 80s. It was the 80s and 90s, and I was like, let's do this. We're all going to take over the world.
Yeah.
I would have been trying to take over the world some other way. But that's interesting because...
Well, that's where the phrase, we're going to take this city for Christ. Where are you taking it? What is that? Where are you going with it? What does that mean?
Where are you going?
And also, has the city been taken for Christ before? What does it look like when you take it?
Yeah, where do you put it after you take it? Bend over and sorry. Wow, sorry.
This of course reminds me of my dad who was turning about 13, and some girl had asked if we could go together. It's some term that we used to use.
A girl asked you?
Yeah.
What a tramp.
Please.
I mean, come on. Or maybe she was
amazing. Well, she was missionary dating. Anyway, So I said, so-and-so wants me to go with her. And my dad just go where?
Go where?
Yeah. So it's like dating. You're not going on dates. So we can still go together. You can do whatever you want, but you're not going anywhere.
I can see your dad doing that.
You don't need to date anybody. You don't need to go anywhere.
Dad, you don't need to go anywhere.
You don't need to go anywhere.
But you kind of said that the other day when Evangeline wanted to do something. And you were like, it's Sunday. She doesn't need to go anywhere. I was like,
after a while, you just get short on stuff. Yeah. Why not? You just don't
need to go.
Yeah.
That's right. But no, the idea that you... Now, the idea that you're responsible for someone's eternal destination, and that's pressure on you, even as a junior teenager, that's a lot to take.
Yes.
But I would say, even as evolved, so to speak, or devolved, depending on who you ask, as we would consider ourselves now, and I think what we try to teach our daughter is, because everyone does have the life of God in them, and they do have value, and they are important to God's heart no matter where they're from, that it is our responsibility to try to bring love to each person. So bringing love to people, or serving them, or trying to leave a conversation with some good, encouraging people, that brought me a lot of freedom to be who I am, and to still continue to bring love and light, as people would say, into the world, without feeling that I had to transform or change someone specifically. That I would be modeling some of those things just in how I am authentically, hopefully. What about you?
Yeah. Oh, I think, so full disclosure, I think that...
were we only doing half disclosure?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think full disclosure, there's certainly a traditional viewpoint within the practice of Christianity in terms of, it just depends on your historic perspective.
Right.
Certainly in the last 200 years, there's very much been a salvation plan. So there's a heaven, there's a hell.
Yeah.
You're going to one or the other, and it's on us to get as many people to heaven as possible.
we can. And the responsibility is ours.
That has not necessarily been the same viewpoint throughout history. It's certainly been the viewpoint we've had for the last couple hundred years.
Yeah.
So within that conversation and that context, you and I have had a lot of conversations, and we've done a lot of reading, and we've done a lot of consideration about what does that look like, and who goes to heaven? Is there a heaven? Who goes to heaven? Who gets in? Who's left out? What is that all about? And the whole evangelical part of that. So the idea of telling people about Jesus, getting them, quote, born again, and bringing them
making
to the
disciples
heaven side. So we've had a lot of conversations about that and considerations about that, and you can really get bogged down in that whole thing. And
I'd say we spent some years of our life, at least I did before I met you and was brought down to your level.
Right.
Trying to do that.
Yeah.
And trying everything that I knew to do that.
So I guess where I personally landed, and I think we're close in the same area of this thing, which is I don't really know where a lot of that stuff lands.
Yeah.
I don't know so much about one thing or another. What I ended up walking away from was not so much, if everybody gets to heaven, then what's the point? Or if there is no heaven, then what's the point? Or that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I just have felt, as we've talked about with the Gospels, maybe 80% of that gospel, even though Jesus is the rescue plan from God. God says, okay, things that are a mess, we got to have a rescue here. We got to lift this thing out. I'm going to send my son Jesus. He's the rescue plan. He's the gateway to heaven. He's the whole thing. And so here he comes, and he shows up on the planet. And so then you get these four guys, and they all write down everything he says and does. Yeah. And that's in the 3-year nationwide tour. And so he's doing all this, and yet within all that account, even though he's the rescue plan, maybe 5 to 10% of it, what is recounted, has to do with heaven. And 80 to 90% of it or more has to do with how we live our lives on this place.
Yes, and how we treat people.
How we interact with each other, how we interact with God in a divine sense and all that kind of stuff. And so that has been, I think, our directive and our approach to life is, I think you and I very much believe in a heaven, not a heaven, but in heaven. And what that looks like. Now, how some of those specifics work out and what all that looks like, I have no idea. I'm still working through all that.
Sure, nobody knows.
But what I do know is that this is the directive. These are the instructions we've been given, which is to love people, and that loving people unlocks people's hearts, unlocks my heart. Loving people brings the divine because God defines himself as love.
Yeah.
And so that is the best I can do. And in doing that, I feel like the weight and the pressure is off. I'm not looking for someone to sign a contract.
Yeah.
I'm not looking for someone to write something on a dotted line. I'm not looking for any of that stuff to happen. What I am looking for is a change in me to love somebody else with a sincerity, not just a thought or a word or whatever, but to love someone sincerely from my heart and to see the kingdom of God come in that way.
Yeah. Well, I used to, it came from honestly, came from the best of intentions, but I think a while back, several decades ago, I used to see people in a way as a prospect.
Right.
And that's a terrible thing to say, but it's true. It was like, well, we have this stuff we're supposed to do, and that person really needs help with this, and I do care for them. And so, you'd start kind of working your strategy. I mean, like I've said before, I was in a cool family where we learned really honestly just to love people and be authentic. And so I was really fortunate, but that was it. It was like you had prospects. You might sometimes even make a list or those. I mean, we spent all those years doing that, and it very, very seldom worked.
Right.
And and people can smell that. They can smell all of that. And so there were scriptures that really helped me, like that God draws people to Him by His loving kindness. And so this concept that we could, because we feel like every person is a value, just try to love them as we would love ourselves, or better than we might love ourselves or our friends or family. Yeah. If we can aim to do that, then it's God's loving kindness that would draw them to Him if they're not already there. Or that's even a weird thing if you think about it.
It's a really interesting consideration. So, like I said, I believe in heaven. I believe in whatever we'd call it, an afterlife, or what that looks like. But let's just say, for the sake of conversation,
that it didn't.
That there either is not a heaven, or that it's not on us to win people to heaven.
Okay.
That there's not that. So we're not, as we say, not getting anybody to sign a contract.
We're not responsible for that.
Does that change how you interact with people? If you don't have that weight or burden, see, it doesn't to me.
Really?
No, in fact.
If you don't have that weight?
I don't feel like I'm loving someone because I'm trying to win them into the kingdom of God.
Yeah, no, I don't anymore, but I grew up feeling that way.
What I'm saying
is, I did love them, but
what I'm saying is, if suddenly you weren't trying to achieve a goal, would it change the way you interact or the responsibility you feel towards loving someone?
No, I mean, the funny thing is, as soon as I started understanding that the pressure was off of me, I was more free to love them in a very sincere and authentic way.
That was my experience.
Because I didn't always have to feel like I had to keep my shit together. I feel better if I'm honest. I mean, what's more loving than saying, I don't have my shit together, neither do you, let's be friends.
I feel more compelled to love people now.
Yes, agreed. And it's a genuine love.
I think where we are in our lives right now, and as we've talked about this kind of evolution, and if you didn't hear that, go back and listen to the first episode and origin stories and all that stuff. But I think when you look at that evolution, and so much of the practice of Christianity is, in a lot of ways, is really simplified for me, and so much of it has come down, almost singularly to this person of Jesus. Yeah, it's the person of Jesus that I have what I feel like is a relationship with and a connection to. It's the person of Jesus that enables me to have some sense or insight or understanding to the scriptures. Apart from that person, there's just a lot of squirrely stuff in that I just can't quite get my mind around. So, but within that relationship, some of it has context, and some of it I can just in grace kind of let go of.
But that spiritual friendship is
driving it,
is the axis,
and it's Him and my relationship with Him and the healing that His love has done in me that is enabling me and enticing me to love others more and more. Yeah. Not the end goal of winning somebody to some place or signing up,
Absolutely.
People for encyclopedias.
And I think the more I've tried to, I hate all these spiritual phrases that we grew up with, like get to know God or whatever, continue to walk with God. They're all just dumb. But the point is, the longer I persist in this friendship that I feel like I have with God, He's my imaginary friend, or He's real. Anyway. because I feel loved for who I am, crap and all, I want to give that love to other people.
Yes.
So I mean, there are some people that are annoying that you're like, man, I really tried to love them.
It's a decision.
But for the most part, I feel a lot of love toward people. And the older I get, I mean, gosh, I can hardly, you see someone in a rough situation, you see a sometimes it's hard to maneuver through the day because you're able to see people the way God must see them.
Right.
And if anything, taking that transactional status out of it, or that, feeling like you have to get something done, and just being with people, which is what Jesus did, frees us up to love them genuinely.
Yes.
And I also realize too, the older I live, my faith becomes much more simple. And I think I said this one time when I was doing music recently. Basically, if I can just continue to, love God and He loves me, and be good to my family and those around me and love them, and try to remain true a little bit to who I feel like God made me to be, then good.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, there's no list of rules, no transaction, any of those things. And that has brought me more freedom. I have a song on the album that I know that you like. I didn't even say what it was or how to find it, but anyway, it's called, it's called Soul to Save.
Yes.
And the gist of the song, it's kind of funny when I'm writing, I don't really think about it. It kind of happens for me intuitively somewhat. And then I can go back and tweak and craft a little bit, but usually the nugget is there. And then I won't have heard it for many months because I don't really like to listen to my own self sing. But I heard that song recently and saw the lyrics, and that's basically the gist of it.
Yeah.
And if you seek one soul to save, let it be mine. It was me singing to God saying, I'm as messed up and in need of you as anyone in this world.
Right.
And I used to, the lyrics basically say I used to go around seeking, souls to save, basically. It's, it's how I was taught when I was young. And now I just am hoping I can hang in there and do my best and persist in a good way in that friendship that I have with God. Just some deep thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, this started with this conversation about, are we God's favorites? Are we more valuable
because we're American
to Him than others? And I don't believe that. Right. And I'll be the first to admit that things that are different still scare me or make me apprehensive, but I don't love all foods, I don't all that kind of stuff, but I am making a decision, and part of that decision and part of the way that I'm choosing to operate in that or walk that thing out is how I treat other people. So, and that starts for me in engaging other people. Yeah. And it starts for me by looking other people in the eye and making that human connection as much as possible. Yeah. And, I'm in no way excusing the bad that other people do and all that kind of stuff and who knows, whatever. But what I am saying is, if we claim to practice Christianity, if we claim to be Christians, then it starts with the fact that all life is God-breathed, all life is God-made, and that's where we begin. And if that's the point of it, then we are on a level playing field. You and I were just somewhere. Maybe we talked about this last time we got together. I don't know, but we're somewhere and in Tulsa actually for a funeral, and here we were, and we just put down a friend of ours' mom and that whole thing, not us personally, but we were there for the funeral, and we were getting in the car and we turned this little corner. Yes. And
this friend's mom was just kind of a nice lifetime long kind of religious Christian lady, and who had her struggles, and to be honest, later in life wasn't really that nice or kind. But she certainly held on to her church stuff. I'm sure there's sincerity.
We turned this corner and we were 50 feet away, and then there's another grave site, and the tombstone is probably a 7 foot tall granite piano.
Yes.
On its edge. And there's Leon Russell.
Yeah.
And who's an amazing internationally known
rock star. Happens to be from where?
Tons of
Tulsa.
gold records and everything, and just happens to be from Oklahoma. And this is an amazing person. And yet they're within 50 feet of each other in ground, in the dirt.
Yes.
And
that
she
lady would have never, ever, because she lived in that church culture, ever probably even known who Leon Russell was.
So there are some great equalizers in this world, how we come into this world, and where our bodies go after this world. It doesn't matter if you're a pauper or a prince or whatever, we're all going to end up in the same dirt at some point.
Yeah.
And if we in the Christian faith believe in heaven, then we have to know that when we get there, it won't be segregated. There's not going to be an American heaven. There's not going to be a white heaven. There's not going to be a rich heaven. There's not going to be a middle-class heaven.
Yeah.
We will all be there together. Yeah. And the reality of that is what we pray for most of us, like nearly every Sunday.
Yeah.
Let your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And so if that is the way that heaven looks, if that is the value, if that is the design, the divine design that God has, then let your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Yeah. And that's what we should be looking at. That's the way we should be treating each other. And so, yes, we can make policies as politicians and as a nation on how we want to govern our borders. We can make policies about how we want to handle our economy. We can do all that, but the idea of weaponizing those things against a people group that are our equal, that are God-loved, that God sent his son Jesus to help rescue, then that to me is a miscalculation at best. That's a wrong thing.
I mean, if we would have one goal, it would be to try to get up each day and bring some love.
Yes.
To whoever we encounter.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that looks different each day, but if I can do one thing, each day to share a little bit of love and encouragement with somebody that's, theology be damned. I don't understand any of it.
Right.
And we talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
And people think they know and they don't know.
Right.
We don't know. But I know what I feel when I'm with someone that needs encouragement and needs love. And I know what I feel when I can do something as simple as buy somebody coffee or whatever it is. Right. That's when I feel God's presence.
Yes.
And in those times where I feel like I'm not getting it right spiritually or not being good enough or guilt or all those things come in, or even amidst theological questions and conversations, if I want to be reminded that God is there and to feel him, it's in loving others. Yeah.
And it doesn't require them to, it doesn't require them to love us first.
No.
There are a lot of other nations that don't love us first, but that's not the call or the charge that we are responding to. And, what you're talking about, that thing about loving people and making them feel loved, that only happens when we're intentional. When we have decided today, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a decision to treat the barista as my equal, to treat the server as my equal, to treat whoever it is, the rich
asshole
as my equal, and as the poor as my equal.
Yeah.
It doesn't. We all have a chance of how we respond to that, and I'm not asking you to take every homeless person into your house or anything like that.
Geez. I mean,
there's a wisdom to all that stuff, but the reality is how we treat and how we see people matters, and so that's the best we can do in that scenario. Yeah. So I would like to thank you, one person who's still listening.
Thank you, one person.
And
I'm not even sure our parents are listening at this point.
Just if you don't mind subscribing so we know who you are, we sure appreciate it.
One person has downloaded your podcast.
Yeah, next time we'll just have you in and we can have the conversation together, all three of us. And we don't always know where this thing is going to go, but we do believe that all life is God breathed and God valued, and that's the way we're choosing to live. And you don't have to agree with the things we talked about today. Any or all are part of that, and that's okay. It's just nice to have the conversation and to think about these things. Speaking of which, you're welcome to leave comments and all that stuff on there, and like and subscribe and forward and be outraged if you need to be and all that. I get it.
Please.
That's okay.
A little outrage would be fun.
Yeah. So, meanwhile, we love you, and thanks for letting us do this and this great experiment. Please subscribe, share, and do all those things, and we will be back when we're back. Peace out.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with a friend. And check out Pioneer Dream's other podcast, Dreamers Live, a conversation about living intentionally, and Got a Minute, a podcast that pairs short humor columns with original music.